You were sent here as a joke." Alexander Grant's words fell like a blade into Isabella's consciousness. She, a young woman struggling with obesity, shy and without resources, never imagined that those girls from the boarding house could play with her life in such a cruel way. Just as a prank, she was sent to clean the penthouse of a rich, cold, and feared man known for not tolerating mistakes. Each step she climbed in that luxurious building seemed to weigh tons, and the humiliation she carried in her chest seemed impossible to bear. But at the same time, there was something in his eyes that Isabella couldn't decipher, a mix of coldness and curiosity that kept her there, motionless. That instant would define everything. The fear, the shame, and surprisingly, the chance of an unexpected turn in her life. What seemed to be cruel humiliation would transform into something that neither she nor anyone could predict. And that's exactly where the real story begins. Isabella could barely believe the audacity of the girls from the boarding house. That sunny morning, they laughed loudly, holding a job ad that seemed harmless but carried the intention to humiliate. Assistant needed for cleaning. Alexander Grant's penthouse. High salary. For any ordinary person, it might sound like an opportunity, but everyone knew Alexander's reputation. Cold, demanding, and merciless with any slip-up. The girls looked at each other and decided it would be hilarious to send Isabella, the young woman with obesity and so shy, to face that. It was like watching someone stumble before even trying to walk. They thought someone else's shame was pure entertainment. She backed away, knowing that any refusal could generate even more mockery, but without money or family, she needed to give in. The fear and pressure from her peers weighed as much as the very steps she would have to take that day. With each mocking word, the tension increased. "Oh, come on, Isabella. Go show a millionaire who doesn't even know your name how to clean." They laughed, mocking her appearance and her shyness. In the small boarding house, where days were silent and monotonous, humiliating someone became entertainment. Isabella felt her heart tighten and her eyes well up, but she knew she had no choice. Each step toward Alexander's building seemed to weigh tons, and the cruel words echoed in her mind. She won't even fit in the elevator of that building. It was an emotional test, a challenge imposed by those who confuse cruelty with entertainment. Each gesture, each breath, made her feel the weight of shame and loneliness while the inevitable journey approached. As she crossed the lobby of the boarding house, Isabella felt as if she carried the world on her shoulders. The awareness that this prank could change her entire life squeezed her chest, and the luxury of Alexander's penthouse contrasted cruelly with her own reality. She knew she needed to be cautious, but couldn't back down, because any hesitation would be cause for more jokes. In that moment, she became the protagonist of a real story that many would judge impossible, that of someone sent as mockery to face an uncertain fate. Each step in the elevator, each labored breath, brought her closer to something no one could predict, and the game of power, fear, and courage was just beginning, about to transform her life in an unexpected way. Isabella tried to back away, closing the door of the tiny room with force, as if she could protect herself from the entire world. But the girls in the boarding house gave no respite. "If you don't go, we're going to tell the landlady that you refuse the opportunity. Then everyone will laugh at you," they said, laughing loudly, not realizing the pain they caused. Alone, without money or family, Isabella had nowhere to run. Her heart beat fast, and each tear that fell seemed to weigh more than anything she had ever felt. The cruel words echoed in her mind. "She won't even fit in the elevator. Nobody's going to want to hire someone like that." She clutched the blanket as if she could hide there, but knew there was no escape. The silence of the room only amplified her anxiety, and the fear seemed to multiply with each passing second. That night, while the wind gently hit the window, Isabella lay on the thin mattress, feeling the hard floor beneath her tired body. Tears flowed uncontrollably as she mentally repeated all the insults she had heard. The humiliation wasn't just in the words, but in the intention to make her feel less. She thought about what it would be like to walk to Alexander Grant's building, face the most feared man in the city, and still have no one by her side. The loneliness crushed her, but something inside her pushed her to continue. She remembered moving stories of people who overcame mockery and rejection, and that comforted her in a strange way. Even feeling vulnerable, Isabella breathed deeply and tried to imagine courage in every gesture. It was a silent, intimate battle that few could understand, but that began there, in the cold room of the boarding house. The exhaustion and fear didn't diminish, but Isabella knew she needed to get up. Each breath seemed to cost more, and yet she prepared herself to face what would come. The young woman with obesity understood, in that instant, that the humiliation she suffered could be just a first step towards something greater, something that no one, not even her peers, could foresee. Her heart beat between anxiety and determination, and the night seemed endless, filled with thoughts of shame and pain. She imagined the mocking smile of the girls and, at the same time, felt the strange certainty that she should prove that it wasn't just a body or appearance that would define her worth. In that moment, Isabella decided that, even with fear, she would take the next step. Each tear, each thought of inferiority, became fuel for the courage that grew inside her, preparing her for the encounter that would change her life forever. When Isabella arrived at Alexander Grant's imposing glass penthouse, her heart seemed to want to leap from her chest. The building reflected the morning sun like a glass mirror, showing the grandeur of a man no one dared to challenge. Alexander, upon seeing her, frowned and immediately realized he had been the victim of a setup. "You were sent here as a joke," he said coldly, each word heavy as a stone. The young woman with obesity felt the floor disappear beneath her feet, but breathed deeply, trying to maintain composure. Trembling, she responded, almost whispering, "I need the job." The courage that emerged in that moment, even accompanied by fear, surprised even herself. It was the first time someone judged her not by her body or appearance, but by what she could really offer. Alexander watched her, evaluating each gesture, each hesitation, intrigued by the unexpected. The silence between the two seemed to last an eternity, loaded with tension and expectation. Every detail of the penthouse reflected luxury and demand. Minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and art objects carefully positioned. Alexander remained silent, analyzing Isabella, who felt his eyes on her like a silent but fair pressure. It was strange to realize that someone so powerful, known for firing employees for any mistake, was now facing her sincerity and courage. She knew that was a decisive moment, one that would define not only her job opportunity, but the way she would be seen in the world. The young woman with obesity breathed deeply, remembering the humiliations and the path that brought her there. The tension of the encounter mixed fear and hope, and the expectation hung like a heavy cloud over them both. Each second seemed to expand the space of the room, making the silence even heavier. Finally, Alexander broke the silence with a look that mixed coldness and curiosity. "You can go home if you want," he said, his voice firm but without anger. Isabella felt the shock of his words, but responded with determination, "No, I need to stay. I need the job." The simple gesture, yet full of courage, marked the beginning of something unexpected. Alexander, intrigued, felt a spark of respect for the young woman who faced fear without wavering. He couldn't imagine that this young woman with obesity, sent as a joke, carried within herself a silent and real strength. Each movement, each look, each small hesitation showed vulnerability and courage coexisting powerfully. And in that instant, the routine of that feared man would begin to change, without either of them yet fully understanding the impact that encounter would have on their lives. Alexander hesitated for an instant, watching Isabella carefully. Something in her silent courage awakened an unexpected curiosity, a spark of respect he hadn't felt in years. "If you're going to work here, do it quietly and don't complain," he finally said, establishing the rules firmly but without cruelty. Isabella nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. As she began her work, she started by cleaning the floors, removing each stain as if erasing the marks of fear she carried with her. She organized the chaos of the apartment carefully, each gesture demonstrating attention to detail, as if each surface reflected her own dignity. The panoramic windows revealed the city below, but for Isabella, the real world in that instant was each corner she cleaned with silent dedication. Alexander watched her from afar, almost surprised by the efficiency and precision of her work, feeling something different, a calm he had never experienced in the environment of his penthouse. The day passed quickly, with the young woman with obesity moving carefully, learning to deal with the intense pace Alexander demanded. The initial tension gave way to an almost meditative routine, each object placed in order, each polished surface, each detail reviewed. For Isabella, that effort wasn't just work. It was a way to prove to herself that she could face challenges that seemed impossible. Alexander, in turn, began to notice subtle changes in his own behavior. The silence of the apartment, once loaded with coldness and loneliness, seemed less heavy. Isabella's presence brought an unexpected balance, a lightness he didn't know he missed. She didn't complain, didn't seek attention, just did her work with dedication and dignity, reminding Alexander that some people have value beyond what's seen on the surface. When the sun began to set, illuminating the penthouse with golden tones, Isabella finished her exhausting routine. The apartment shone like never before, reflecting the care and dedication she had put into every detail. Alexander watched her, murmuring almost to himself, "You work well." That simple phrase carried more than recognition. It was a sign that he was beginning to see beyond appearances, seeing the authenticity and strength of character of the young woman with obesity. For Isabella, the physical exhaustion was intense, but the feeling of achievement and respect made her heart beat faster. That moment marked the beginning of a new dynamic between them, one that no one at the boarding house could imagine. Something was changing, and the simple act of staying there, facing fear and humiliation, was transforming into opportunity. What no one knew yet was that this day would be the first step in a story that would forever change both their lives. The next day, Isabella returned to the penthouse without Alexander calling her. Each step she took to the apartment seemed to carry a mix of determination and anxiety. But at the same time, there was a lightness she had never felt before. The young woman with obesity moved carefully, cleaning every corner, organizing objects, and polishing windows that reflected the entire city. The silence, which before was loaded and almost suffocating, now seemed welcoming. Alexander watched her from afar, noticing that her presence brought a feeling of unexpected, almost therapeutic calm that he had never experienced in his entire life of wealth and rigor. Each gesture of hers showed discipline, humility, and genuine dedication, rare qualities in the world he lived in. Little by little, he began to notice small changes in himself. Impatience decreased, and coldness became less intense. Isabella didn't complain, didn't ask for praise, just fulfilled her tasks with excellence. Each day, their routine became a silent dance of respect and trust. For Alexander, it was impressive how someone sent as a joke could bring so much balance and serenity. He began to value her presence, not just as an employee, but as someone who positively modified his world. Isabella, in turn, felt a satisfaction she had never experienced, the silent recognition of her effort. Each day became a learning experience, an opportunity to strengthen her self-esteem and prove she could face any challenge. The young woman with obesity, who arrived full of fear, now began to feel secure in her own worth, discovering strength and dignity within herself. The routine repeated itself, but each gesture had a greater purpose. Isabella learned Alexander's habits and preferences, understanding how small actions made a difference in that sophisticated and demanding environment. She began to anticipate needs, to organize spaces even before they were requested, showing attention to detail that surprised the millionaire. Alexander, who had always maintained emotional distance from everyone, began to appreciate her constant presence. He noticed that the young woman with obesity didn't just clean the penthouse, but also softened the cold atmosphere that reigned there. It was as if each act of care from her had the power to transform the environment, making it more human. He began to watch her more closely, intrigued and, at the same time, admired. Isabella's dedication went far beyond what any payment could reward. There was something genuine in her way of being, something that neither wealth nor power could buy. Each detail she arranged, each polished surface, reflected discipline and love for what she did. Alexander began to understand that respect and dedication walked together, and that Isabella's courage in staying there revealed more about her than any superficial appearance. The young woman with obesity, who arrived as a target of jokes, now became essential in the life of that feared man. And, silently, both felt that the relationship between them was beginning to change in a profound and unexpected way. It didn't take long for Alexander to realize that his own routine was transforming thanks to Isabella's presence. The previously silent and rigid environment now carried a feeling of welcome he had never experienced. He found himself admiring the way she dealt with exhaustion and pressure, always focused on each task with attention and patience. The young woman with obesity began to earn his respect not just for the work she did, but for the way she faced challenges with courage and dignity. With each passing day, Alexander felt less need to impose severe rules and more desire to observe and learn from her silent strength. For Isabella, the implicit recognition and appreciation she felt in that environment were a balm for all the wounds caused by contempt and cruel jokes of the past. Little by little, she realized that the trust built there had immeasurable value. With each simple gesture, she showed that humility and dedication can transform relationships and hearts. Alexander, even without realizing it, was learning to trust and value something that went beyond appearance or financial strength. The young woman with obesity, sent as a joke, was now essential to that space and, silently, conquered her place not only in the apartment's routine, but also in the millionaire's heart. And, unknowingly, both were preparing for even greater challenges and revelations that were yet to come. One day, while Isabella worked with concentration, the girls in the boarding house appeared in the lobby just to laugh at her, as if humiliation were guaranteed entertainment. Alexander found them at the exact moment, and his icy look made the laughter die in their throats. Without raising his voice, with a silent authority that seemed to pierce walls, he said, "You laughed at someone who has more dignity than all of you put together." The effect was immediate. Wounded pride and surprise took over the young women, who left quickly, not knowing how to react. Isabella, still holding the cleaning cloth, felt a mix of relief and intense emotion. For the first time in her life, someone defended her without expecting anything in return. Her heart beat fast, but lightness took over her mind and chest, as if the weight of years of humiliation had diminished in seconds. Alexander didn't need to shout or humiliate. His simple act of silent justice showed power and respect. Tears ran in Isabella's eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude, not fear or shame. She realized that, finally, her courage and dedication were being genuinely recognized. And in that instant, something inside her changed. The world no longer needed to dictate her worth. Alexander, for his part, felt that protecting Isabella was more than a gesture of authority. It was recognizing her authenticity. The girls from the boarding house left humiliated, but Isabella entered the apartment in silence, feeling strengthened. Each detail she cleaned now had a new meaning, and the millionaire's silent respect became fuel for her self-esteem. The routine continued, but the episode marked a definitive change. Isabella began to move with more confidence, knowing she wasn't alone and that her dignity couldn't be underestimated. Alexander, watching each gesture of hers, felt increasingly impressed with the strength and calm she transmitted, even in pressure situations. He noticed that environment, once cold and calculating, was becoming more human because of her. The young woman with obesity now saw herself not just as an employee, but as someone who truly mattered in that space. Each small gesture, each job well done, reflected a determination that went far beyond the physical, something Alexander was beginning to value deeply. She discovered, little by little, that the respect earned was more powerful than any superficial recognition. Alexander felt, internally, that his own perception of value was changing, and that protecting Isabella was more than an action. It was a recognition of character. The young woman finally learned that courage can manifest itself in silent persistence, and that dignity is something no one can take away. Isabella began to approach work with new energy. The episode of Alexander's defense had strengthened her self-esteem, and she felt increasingly confident to face any challenge. The girls from the boarding house were now just memories of the past, echoes of cruelty that no longer had power over her. Alexander, watching her from afar, saw each action with silent admiration, noticing that the young woman with obesity had an inner strength that few possessed. He didn't need to say anything for respect to be evident. Each movement of hers, each care with the apartment, showed determination, courage, and authenticity. Isabella, in turn, felt valued not by words, but by actions, and that transformed her relationship with the world and with herself. The environment of the penthouse, once tense and cold, now breathed lightness and respect through the balance created between them. Alexander began to realize that some life lessons come through empathy and silent observation, and that Isabella's authenticity was something he could never underestimate. Each day of work became more meaningful, and the young woman with obesity began to feel like the protagonist of her own story. Over time, Alexander began to open up to Isabella in a way he never imagined possible. On a quiet afternoon, he shared about his childhood marked by a violent father and how he learned to hide pain behind anger and rigor. Each word revealed layers of vulnerability that few knew, showing that behind the facade of a cold millionaire was a man with deep wounds. Isabella, with a trembling voice, began to talk about her own story. The years of ridicule for her body, the cruel jokes of her peers, poverty, and the constant feeling of not belonging. As she spoke, silent tears ran, but the feeling wasn't weakness, but relief at finally being heard. Alexander listened attentively, each gesture of hers showing strength and authenticity that he deeply admired. He realized that they both carried invisible scars, but that sharing them brought them closer in an unexpected way. Isabella felt that, for the first time, someone truly saw her as a person, not as a target of mockery or a joke. The comfortable silence that followed brought the feeling of true connection. Both understood that, despite their differences, pain made them more human and closer. It was as if each revelation was a bridge that united them, transforming wounds into mutual understanding. The young woman with obesity felt that her worth went far beyond body and shyness, and Alexander began to see something that wealth could never buy: authenticity and courage. In that instant, a deep bond began to form, silent but unbreakable. Alexander, looking into Isabella's eyes, spoke firmly. "You're not a mistake. You're the only authentic person who's ever walked in here." The young woman with obesity felt a different warmth invade her chest, something she had never experienced: genuine acceptance and absolute respect. Each word of his carried weight and sincerity, and seemed to erase, little by little, all the humiliation she suffered throughout her life. The recognition of her authenticity, her courage, and her dedication to work transformed that space into something more than just a luxurious penthouse. It transformed it into a refuge of appreciation and dignity. Alexander realized that, no matter how hard he tried to maintain control and distance, Isabella's presence touched something deep in his own soul, awakening emotions he had long repressed. She, in turn, felt she finally belonged somewhere, not by appearance or function, but for who she really was. Each gesture of care, each shared word, reinforced connection between them, creating mutual respect that transcended any social convention. The young woman with obesity, sent as a joke, began to realize that her inner strength could transform not only her life, but also that of those around her. The silent bond between them grew with each look and each conversation, bringing hope and confidence where before there was fear and insecurity. The shared wounds created an unexpected and powerful intimacy. Alexander, who always had vulnerabilities behind wealth and power, discovered that talking about pain didn't diminish his authority, but strengthened the relationship with Isabella. She, in turn, felt understood in a way she never imagined possible, feeling that her story of suffering now had value and meaning. Each confidence brought them closer, breaking invisible barriers that society, appearance, and fear had placed between them. The young woman with obesity understood that being authentic and courageous was more important than molding herself to others' expectations, and Alexander saw that her strength wasn't the physical, but in integrity and the courage to face the world. Mutual respect and understanding became the foundation of something much greater than simple work or coexistence. Each conversation, each gesture, each shared silence solidified a connection that no financial power could buy. Trust and bonding created a unique atmosphere, where both could be vulnerable without fear or judgment. The young woman, who arrived as a target of cruel jokes, was now an essential and respected presence in Alexander's life. And, silently, both began to understand they were about to experience something that would change their lives forever. Soon, the city began to talk about Alexander Grant and the young woman with obesity from the boarding house who now worked in his penthouse. Rumors ran quickly through office hallways and coffee shops, as if the story were fuel for gossip and judgment. "The millionaire is keeping the fat girl from the boarding house in his penthouse," they heard whispered, between laughter and curious looks. A group of businessmen, uncomfortable with the situation and wanting to provoke Alexander, decided to confront him in the office, believing they could destabilize him. But when he stood up, he faced him with firmness and clarity, like someone who doesn't tolerate nonsense. "She works harder and has more character than any of you. Now get out." The effect was immediate. Surprise, shame, and powerlessness took over them. Isabella, upon hearing about the episode, felt her heartbeat faster, a mix of relief and emotion. For the first time, she realized that her dedication and dignity weren't just recognized, but also publicly defended. Alexander showed that value and character surpass appearance or others' opinions. The young woman with obesity, who arrived as a target of mockery, now became an example of courage and authenticity. The millionaire's silent and firm protection reinforced Isabella's confidence. She felt increasingly secure, understanding that her presence there was important and respected. The environment around them, once full of judgments and gossip, seemed to lose strength before Alexander's firm stance. And, silently, their story began to transform everyone's perception about value, dignity, and courage. The scandal generated looks and comments throughout the city, but Alexander remained unshakable. He understood that gossip and opinions were irrelevant when confronted with integrity and dedication. For him, Isabella wasn't just an employee, but someone who demonstrated character, courage, and authenticity, qualities he valued above any title or wealth. The young woman with obesity, in turn, felt a mix of amazement and gratitude, realizing that life could be fair in unexpected ways. Each gesture of Alexander, each firm and silent word, strengthened her confidence and self-esteem. The critical looks and malicious words no longer had effect, because she knew she had someone who saw beyond the surface. The story that would once be cause for jokes now transformed into an example of overcoming. Alexander was showing, through his actions, that dignity, effort, and authenticity would always be more important than appearance or rumors. The young woman with obesity began to understand the value of her own strength, and that, with courage and persistence, it was possible to change everyone's perception around her. Each day of work and dedication consolidated that silent and powerful transformation, and deep down, both knew that episode was just one more step towards something even greater and unexpected. While the scandal spread and gossip tried to destabilize the young woman with obesity, Alexander reinforced his stance of defense and respect. He not only protected Isabella, but showed everyone that true value goes far beyond superficial judgment. The young woman felt that each day in the penthouse became more significant, not only for work, but for the security and recognition she finally found. Alexander, with his silent firmness, demonstrated that a person's dignity and character cannot be diminished by others' opinions. Isabella, who arrived at the apartment with fear and insecurity, now understood that courage and authenticity always have value. Each gesture, each silent defense, consolidated a relationship of trust and respect that completely transformed the dynamic between them. The scandal, instead of affecting, strengthened the young woman with obesity, showing there was room for recognition and respect even amid others' malice. Alexander realized that, by valuing and protecting someone so genuine, he was not only changing her life, but also transforming his own. And, without fully realizing it, both were preparing for even greater challenges and revelations that were yet to come, while the city continued to comment and be surprised by the unexpected situation. Days later, the boarding house landlady appeared accompanied by the girls, demanding that Isabella return immediately. "Living alone with a man would tarnish her reputation," she declared, full of authority and prejudice, believing she could impose rules on someone else's life. Alexander, however, remained firm, without any hesitation. "You sent her here as a joke, but I found the only person worth keeping." His voice, calm and confident, carried a weight no one dared to challenge. Isabella felt her heart race and her eyes fill with tears, unable to believe what she was hearing. For the first time, someone defended not just her work, but her dignity and worth as a human being. Alexander turned to her and, with a firmness that mixed surprise and tenderness, said, "Not as an employee, but as my wife." The impact of the words was instantaneous, leaving everyone present in absolute silence, not knowing how to react. The girls, incredulous, looked at her, trying to find a reaction that didn't come. Isabella, trembling, felt that all the humiliations and cruel jokes had transformed into something completely unexpected. The young woman with obesity, sent as a joke, was now valued and loved. Alexander, who before seemed cold and distant, revealed a deep and protective side. The scene in the apartment became a moment of redemption and definitive turn, where courage and authenticity triumphed over mockery and prejudice. Each tear that ran now was of emotion and gratitude, no longer fear or pain. The weight of the past seemed to dissolve before the gesture of trust and love from the millionaire. Isabella's reaction was a mix of disbelief and pure emotion. She felt her body tremble and her mind spin with so many simultaneous sensations: fear at not believing, joy at being recognized, and unexpected love arising in her heart. Alexander watched her, holding her hand, transmitting security and firmness. It was the first time someone looked at her so completely, seeing not just her exterior, but her essence, her courage, and dignity. The silence of the penthouse, once loaded and cold, now filled with a new feeling: hope, recognition, and mutual respect. The girls, embarrassed, tried to understand the scene, but nothing could alter the bond that had been consolidated there. Alexander, with his firm and calm look, showed there was no room for gossip, mockery, or manipulation. Isabella, for her part, felt she finally belonged somewhere, not by appearance, but for who she really was. Each gesture, each word from the millionaire, transformed her life, showing that dignity and courage are always rewarded. She understood that the trajectory of humiliation became just a prelude to something greater and unexpected. The mutual respect and admiration were consolidated there, making evident that bond was unbreakable. And, silently, both prepared to live a story no one could predict. In that very instant, Alexander and Isabella realized something unique was happening. The young woman with obesity, who began her journey as the target of cruel jokes, was now being elevated to a place of recognition, respect, and love. Alexander, by choosing to defend her and proclaim her as his wife, transformed not only her life, but also his own vision about relationships, human value, and courage. The environment of the penthouse, once filled with coldness and silence, now breathed warmth, emotion, and possibility. Each object, each space cleaned by Isabella, seemed to reflect the transformation occurred within them. The young woman felt she could finally let go, be herself, and experience something she never imagined: being valued for her authenticity. Alexander understood that, by looking beyond appearances and protecting who deserved it, he was finding something no amount of money could buy: genuine love and loyalty. The weight of past humiliation transformed into strength, and each moment of courage from the young woman with obesity now became a foundation for a new and surprising life. And, in that very apartment, their story became living proof that dignity, courage, and authenticity always find reward. Isabella, trembling with emotion, finally accepted Alexander's proposal. For the first time in her life, she felt totally recognized, valued, and loved. The apartment that was once the scene of humiliations now became a refuge of respect and affection, where each corner reflected the dedication and courage she had demonstrated. Alexander, the cold and demanding millionaire, found peace in the eyes of the woman the world despised, discovering that true love isn't measured by appearance or status. Each gesture of hers, each look, transformed the atmosphere of the place, filling the empty spaces with warmth and understanding. Isabella felt that all the past suffering, all the cruel jokes, had been just stages of a path that would lead her to that moment of redemption and happiness. The young woman with obesity, sent as a joke, now became the wife of the man who never wanted to let her go, showing that courage and authenticity always find reward. Alexander admired every detail about her, realizing that her presence made not just the apartment, but his life more complete. The change was profound and silent, but impossible to ignore. Their routine changed completely, now marked by partnership, respect, and mutual affection. Each day began with small demonstrations of care and attention, reinforcing that the love growing between them didn't depend on external circumstances. Isabella discovered the strength that existed within herself, realizing she didn't need to submit to others' opinions to be valued. Alexander, in turn, learned to soften his rigidity, recognizing that vulnerability and empathy can coexist with power and authority. The young woman with obesity, who before faced laughter and contempt, now lived surrounded by respect and recognition. A true life transformation. Each gesture from Alexander consolidated the certainty that she was unique, someone who brought balance and humanity to a world that seemed driven only by wealth and coldness. The complicity between the two grew, showing that love and dedication are capable of healing old wounds and creating a future full of possibilities. The young woman began to see herself with new eyes, feeling confident and complete. Alexander, watching each step of hers, felt pride and gratitude for having found someone so authentic. And together, they began to write a story that combined overcoming love and redemption. Alexander's last look at Isabella that night reflected everything they had built together: trust, respect, courage, and unconditional love. Each tear shed, each moment of fear and insecurity, transformed into strength and gratitude. The man who was once known for his coldness and demands now let himself be touched by the authenticity and courage of the young woman with obesity who transformed his life. Isabella understood that a person's worth isn't in appearances or what others think, but in the ability to face challenges, maintain dignity, and be true to oneself. Alexander learned that protecting and valuing someone is much more important than any status or external judgment. The apartment, silent witness to the entire journey, now reflected not just cleanliness and order, but love, respect, and personal transformation. The young woman, who began the journey with fear and humiliation, now lived surrounded by acceptance, affection, and genuine happiness. Each day became an opportunity to build something greater, solid, and true. And there, in the same place that was once the scene of cruel jokes, Isabella and Alexander discovered that love can transform even the deepest wounds into redemption and infinite joy. Following Isabella's journey, it's clear that courage, authenticity, and dedication can transform even the most difficult situations into opportunities for respect, recognition, and personal growth. How many times do we let others' judgment discourage us, without realizing that the strength we need is already within us? This story shows that, even when underestimated or ridiculed, each effort and each gesture of character counts, opening doors no one would imagine. Now reflect. Where can you be more authentic and courageous, even facing challenges? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow more moving and real stories that teach you to apply courage, dignity, and persistence in your own life.